jQuery is the most popular JavaScript library by far, and it really does make JavaScript easier. Easier to navigate and manipulate the DOM, easier to add events, easier to work with animation, and really to do the same things we've been doing all along, but with less code. So how do you use it? Well, very simply, what you need to do is go out to jQuery.com and just download the JavaScript. You'll find that even from the homepage, you have a choice of either the development version, which is just the fully readable JavaScript, or a production version, which is 31K after it's being minified and gzipped, so it really doesn't add much weight to your website. I've actually gone ahead and downloaded both versions to the current folder that I'm working with, but I only need the minified one. I have no intention of changing or even reading the other code. And then if I want to use it in my HTML page, I'm simply going to go in and add a link to it. In this case, I'm linking to the minified version. Now, you could certainly make an argument here that it's possible to load jQuery or any other library with a script tag up in the head of your document. And if I thought I needed it as soon as possible, I might do that, but I'm pretty confident that I can load it down here just fine. Though I am making sure that I'm loading the jQuery file before any of my own code that might use it. So what do we then do with it? Well, let's start with something simple. Without jQuery, we'd often write lines of code like this: document.getElementById, give it the name of an ID from the HTML, and then work with methods, or in this case, a property. I'm setting the class name equal to highlight. With jQuery, I might write this instead. The word jQuery with a lowercase j and an uppercase Q. In the parentheses here, I'm using the number sign or pound sign or hash sign, depending on which country you're from, and then my div to indicate that this is an ID. This is the same way we do this in CSS. And then a dot, and then add class highlight. So you might think, well, so what? A little less code, big deal. But here's where it gets interesting. There are two reasons why the jQuery version is preferable. First, with getElementById, we need this element to have an ID of my div in our HTML. And if it doesn't have an ID in the HTML, we can't get to it. But jQuery is much more flexible than that. We can give jQuery an ID to find by using the hash or the pound sign, but we can also find other parts of the page that we can't get with getElementById. For example, we can get all the elements with a particular class just by using the dot, the same way we would in CSS. We can get all the elements of a particular tag, like all the paragraphs or all the anchors or all the list items. And this piece in parentheses is known as the selector. We are telling jQuery what we want it to find. And the selectors are really borrowed from CSS, which is why we use a pound or hash for an ID and a period for a class name. And unlike getElementById, which will only work on one individual piece, anything we do with jQuery will automatically work on all of the elements that match this selector, that match what we're looking for. Now we can even refine it more than this. We could combine a couple of these. For example, in this case, p.description, give me all the paragraphs that have a class of description already on them. And there are also certain words we can add to further refine this, like :first, :last, :contains, :visible. The way these would be used, again, is combining them with other parts of the selector. So let's take a look at how. So I've switched over to a file of some JavaScript, which I have mostly commented out here so I can go through this. Right now we're using the standard DOM way of getElementById, which is going to apply a CSS highlight to this main section here, main article. Looks kind of ugly, but it's proving the point that this actually works. Comment that one out. The jQuery version here would just be finding the div and adding the class of highlight. We're going to get more into why this is better in just a minute anyway. But we can get more flexible than that. I can simply say jQuery.tourDescription to find all elements with a particular class. Jump back over to the web page and refresh it. And I can actually see that that class is being applied to several different elements on the page. Similarly, I could apply that class to all the elements that were list items just by doing this. This doesn't use the pound sign or the dot. It just says li or p or a for a list item or a paragraph or an anchor tag. Refresh that page and we can see that both here where I've got list items and down at the bottom, it's looking rather ugly, but it proves the point here that it is actually being applied to multiple elements at the same time. We can take that a little further, commenting that one out and then adding the colon last to it. We'll first find all the list items in the entire DOM and then we'll add the class to the very last one. If I refresh this, and we can see that that works as well. And I can go even better than that. Using the colon contains word in jQuery, we can tell that our selector will find all paragraphs and then filter them down to say only the ones that contain the word packages, and then add the class of highlight. So saving that, refreshing the page and scanning back up, I can see that it's applying that class to several of them as long as the paragraph contains the word packages. So with jQuery, there are many ways to get immediately to very specific parts of the page without needing an ID on them. So with the selector, we're telling jQuery what to look for, then we have a dot, and then we tell it what we want to do, some action, some change that we're doing. In this case, jQuery find the ID of my div and then add the class of highlight. Now, the second reason why this is better is that add class is much more flexible than just using class name with our document.getElementById. See, when we use class name, it's a property. We're just setting it. It will overwrite any classes that were there before. But when we use add class with jQuery, it adds our new CSS class and keeps any that were there before. So we can start stacking our CSS classes up on our elements. And not only do we have an add class, we also have a remove class method in jQuery and a toggle class method in jQuery, which means if the class is not there, add it. If it is there, remove it. And this is a great little microcosm of what jQuery is all about. It's more accurate, it's more flexible, there are more choices. It's kind of what you wish JavaScript did in the first place. Now we can make our code even shorter. If you think that typing out jQuery might get a little tedious because it's easy to get the casing of this mixed up, well, there's a shortcut so we don't have to. We simply replace the word jQuery with the $. So the general format we're going to use with jQuery is the $, and then in parentheses the selector or what to find, then a dot, and then some action and any parameters we have to pass about what to do, what do we want to do. So what does the $sign mean? Well, the $sign is just an alias, a shortcut for jQuery itself. Unlike languages like PHP, there's nothing magical about the $sign in JavaScript. It's just one of the accepted characters in a variable name. $sign here is just a really short variable name that points to jQuery. So what else do we have? Well, we have some great ways of working with effects. So I'm going to just uncomment this line of code here at line 22. Which is going to use the $sign for jQuery, tell it to find all paragraphs, and then call hide with the parameter of 4000. Saving that, I'm going to jump over to the browser and then just refresh this page. Okay, I might not always want to do that, but what hide is doing, as you can probably tell, is taking 4000 milliseconds or 4 seconds to hide all paragraphs. And the great thing is jQuery is taking care of animating all this without us worrying about set interval calls or set timeout calls. So we've got hide, we've got show, we've got slide down, slide up, fade in, fade out, all just as easy to use. And then there are events. Working with events in jQuery is very simple indeed. If I just uncomment these pieces of code here, we can use the same selectors, the $, in this case an ID of page ID, dot click, and in this case passing it an anonymous function. Now what's this one going to do? Well, it's easier to show. Jumping back over and refreshing this page. When I click on the word tours, it just changes to you clicked me. We're using the pound page ID to add the click event and using that same selector and using the text method here to set its text value rather than having to drill down into the individual text node. Again, very easy to add an event and very easy to start manipulating that DOM element. Not only that, but jQuery is also very conscious of the word this. So if we use jQuery to add, for example, a click event to all the H2 elements, we can then be smart enough to know whichever particular H2 is clicked will be considered this every time that this function is called. Meaning what? Jumping back over to the browser, as we scan down, I know that these are H2s, and when I click each individual one, it knows exactly what caused that event to be raised, so it's smart enough to know which one gets changed. And very simply, we could combine both jQuery adding events and combine jQuery's animation, so that very easily, refreshing this page every time we click on a paragraph, it's smart enough to just disappear and fade out. And one last thing here, we're familiar with using window.onload to call some script when we know that the DOM is fully loaded. One of the problems with window.onload is if you accidentally write it multiple times, only the last one will be paid attention to. Whereas in jQuery, we have the $document.ready function. This does a very similar thing, meaning that the code we put inside here will be executed when the DOM is fully loaded, but if we needed to, we could actually call that same thing multiple times, and we wouldn't have to worry about the last one overriding the first one. In this case, I'm calling it twice. Once I'll change the content of this page ID to the DOM is fully loaded, and then the next one I'm going to set colors of H1 to red. We refresh that page and we can see that both of those are being applied. Now this is just a taste, a quick intro. jQuery gets a lot deeper than this, of course, so check out the documentation on jQuery.com or take a look at one of several jQuery courses we have here at lynda.com.